Hello everyone. Today's topic is void agreement. The legal definition of the term void agreement is given in Section 2, Clause G of the Indian Contract Act. According to this section, an agreement not enforceable by law is said to be void. In simple words, it means that an agreement which does not create any legal obligation is a void agreement. The parties cannot go to the court and enforce the promise. Void agreement is void ab initio, that is, void from the very beginning without any legal effect. Let us now discuss what are the various types of void agreements. Number 1. Agreements by persons who are not competent to contract. Section 11 of the Indian Contract Act specifies the persons who are competent to contract. Every person who is major or of sound mind and is not disqualified from entering into a contract is competent to contract. In other words, we may say that the following persons cannot enter into a contract: minors, persons of unsound mind, and persons disqualified by law. Next point, agreements under a bilateral mistake of fact. Section 20. Bilateral mistake means a mistake in which both the parties to an agreement are at mistake related to the essential part of the agreement. Example: Manish agreed to sell his horse to Shyam, but it was unknown to both the parties that the horse had already died at the time of making the agreement. It is a void agreement because both the parties are under a mistake of fact related to the essential part of the agreement. Next point, agreement with unlawful consideration or object. Section 23 of the Indian Contract Act. Example: Ramesh sold liquor without license to Mohan. In this case, the sale of liquor without license is forbidden by law, that is, forbidden by the Excise Act. Let us move on to the next void agreement. Agreement, the consideration or object of which is unlawful in part. Section 24 of the Indian Contract Act. Sometimes an agreement consists of two parts, one legal and the other illegal, and the legal part is separable from the illegal one. In such cases, the court may enforce the legal part of the agreement. But if the legal and illegal parts cannot be separated, the whole agreement is unenforceable. Example: Raju and Atul agreed that Raju would sell a house for rupees 10 lakh. But if Atul used it as a gambling house, he would pay rupees 15 lakhs as the price of the house. In this case, the first set of promise, that is, to sell the house and pay rupees 10 lakh for it, is legal and enforceable. And the second set of promise, that is, promise under which Atul is allowed to use the house as a gambling house, is illegal and cannot be enforced. The object of second set of promise is unlawful. Let us now move on to the next point. Agreement without consideration is void. Section 25. The general rule is that an agreement without consideration is void. Consideration means something in return. It means that when a party to an agreement promises to do something, he must get something in return. This something which a party gets in return is the consideration. But Section 25 of the Indian Contract Act also explains the exceptions where an agreement can be enforced without a consideration. These exceptions will be discussed in my next video, so please stay tuned. Now we move on to our next void agreement, that is agreement in restraint of marriage. Section 26 says that every person has the freedom to marry a person of his or her choice, and no one can put restrictions on the freedom of the person for marriage, and such restriction is against public policy and considered void. Example: Majnu promised to marry no one else except Laila, and if he marries someone else, he will pay Laila a sum of rupees 2 lakhs. But Majnu married Juliet, and Laila sued him for the recovery of the amount he promised. But this agreement is void, so it cannot be enforced. Next point: agreements in restraint of trade. According to Section 27, every person has the freedom to carry on any trade, profession, occupation, or business activities which is lawful. An agreement by which anyone is restrained from exercising a lawful profession, trade, or business of any kind is void. Example: Ramlal and Mohanlal are shopkeepers in a locality of Guwahati. Ramlal agreed to pay a sum of rupees 2 lakhs to Mohanlal if Mohanlal would close his business in that locality. This is a void agreement. Next, agreements in restraint of legal proceedings. Section 28 of the Indian Contract Act explains that an agreement which stops a person from taking a legal action under any contract is void. Example: Ashish borrowed rupees 2 lakhs from Vikas, a money lender. There is an agreement between these two parties that Ashish would repay the loan within 1 year, and if the amount was not repaid, Vikas would not take any legal action against him. This agreement is void because it restrains Vikas from enforcing his legal right. Next, agreements the meaning of which is uncertain is also void. Section 29 says that the meaning of the agreement must be certain. In other words, we may say that an agreement whose meaning is not certain is not valid. Example: there is an agreement between Rita and Geeta that Rita will sell her motorbike to Geeta for rupees 30,000 or 40,000. This agreement is uncertain, so it is void. Next void agreement is wagering agreement. A wagering agreement is an agreement in which one person agrees to pay certain amount of money or money's worth to the other person on the happening or non-happening of a specified uncertain event. Section 30 of the Indian Contract Act says that agreements by way of wager are void. Example: Sachin and Rahul enter into an agreement that if India wins the One Day Cricket World Cup 2021, Sachin will pay rupees 1 lakh to Rahul, and if Pakistan wins, Rahul will pay. This is a wagering agreement and it is void. Next point: agreements to do impossible acts. Section 56 of the Indian Contract Act explains that an agreement to do an act impossible in itself is void. Let me explain this point to you with an example. Ramesh and Manju entered into a contract to marry each other on 1st November 2022. Before the due date of the marriage, Manju died in an accident. In this case, the contract becomes void because the performance of the contract becomes impossible. I hope you like the explanation. Thank you for watching and listening.